Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu has called for a comprehensive overhaul of global governance, financial structures, and healthcare systems to create a fairer and more inclusive world order. He made the call at the 17th BRICS Summit in Brazil, Rio de Janeiro, where he emphasized that emerging and low-income economies, particularly in Africa, deserve a more representative global system. He noted that Africa contributes minimally to global emissions but suffers disproportionately from climate change impact. To speak more on this, we are joined by international journalist, policy affairs analyst Adeniyi Kunnu. Hello, Adeniyi. Thank you for joining us at this time.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So based on the summit, we see that the BRICS countries have clearly rejected the label of being, anti-American. They are seeking a multilateral world order that Washington has denounced time and time again. How do you see this, this view existing side by side?
Well, let's understand that the United States of America has undoubtedly contributed immensely to many of the technological innovations and the huge dynamics that we've seen. I need to put it on record here that but for the African Charter initiated by the US, I do not think that a number of other African nations who have been free from the jugular of the colonist. But that is to establish the contribution of the US to global emancipation in the colonial era. But let me come to the reality of the now. Many countries that were colonized at some point had certain levels of advancement, certain levels of innovation, even if it has not become such impressive innovations. And the world has become so shrunk by virtue of the global enterprises that are connected that many of these countries have come to the realization of their capacity to even do what the US is doing as well as many other countries. Then do not also forget, whenever we make mention of the dynamics of global economy, it can never be what we describe as something that has to be run by a country. For instance, you want to talk about Russia that went to the moon before the US. You want to talk about India and China that are strong footholds in Asia. You want to talk about Brazil, undoubtedly the most populated country in South America. You want to talk about South Africa, the country that equals Nigeria with regard to its economy. So nations of the world will look at areas of interest and will look at areas of interdependence. And those are the factors that drive all sorts of collaboration. Do not forget, anytime we talk about businesses, international diplomacy, global politics and economy, we look at what is in it for me. And perhaps many of these nations, especially at the 17th BRICS meeting, have done a thorough comparative analysis of the advantages that have been coming to them before now and what advantages they have for the future. Perhaps, amongst many other things, this has propelled them. So, being labeled anti American may not actually be what I really feel should continue. It is to see that people have to play fairly on the platform of global connections, and that will allow people to ensure that there's equity and further advancement and connection for the respective countries that have gathered.
So, would you say that the constant sidelining by the top economies or the West informed President Tinubu's clamor for equity for emerging economies?
Well, let me make it clear here that for any leader who speaks by representing the most populous black nation in the country, that leader must speak in such a way as to allow the coherence and connectedness of the country that he leads or that she leads. It is a fact of discussion and conversation in high places that if you want to talk about what allows country come together, you have to look at what are the corporate advantages and what are the seeming disadvantages. I think that the president did not speak. I'm talking about President Bola Tinubu of Nigeria. He did not speak from an uninformed position. He spoke as somebody who has lived in the West, as somebody who has schooled in the West, as somebody who has actually connected with people for many years, with regard to political leadership. And I have to give him his flowers that he sure understands the areas. Quite frankly, as an insider and the president of the country, he understands, quite frankly, the areas of limitation and the areas where we could connect better. So President Tinubu did not speak from an uninformed position. He spoke from a very informed position. However, I need to make it clear that for somebody to consolidate such truth, to consolidate such factual position, then the person has to look inwards to see how one's country can become a stronger partner rather than a dependent partner. We're talking about global connection and international policy, diplomacy, and economics. So the president has spoken well, but he has to go 10 steps further by complementing the truth of factual position in ensuring that the country is enviable enough to attract such contract or foreign direct investment that could be attracted by addressing the core infrastructural issues, beginning with power and many other such infrastructures that will allow foreign direct investments into the country and reliable economic policies. That's my position on that.
So we see, based on President Tinubu's speech, we see him laying emphasis on access to foreign loans. I'm sure a lot of Africans will be wondering why loans, why are we always associated with loans? What's your take on that?
Well, that is another area where I think the president has to reinvent his ideals. When you go on foreign platforms, you don't go with your beggar plate. You have to go there and speak strongly. If you examined what was said by the Chinese representative or by the Chinese president or by the Chinese authorities, if you look at what was discussed by those who represented or even Cyril Ramaphosa himself, you have to agree with me that those leaders did not speak with emphasis on loan. They spoke with emphasis on collaboration. They spoke with emphasis on the opportunities available for people who want to invest in their country. They spoke from the point of view of the strength that they have as a country that is absolutely ready for investment. When you go, for instance, to Brazil or you go to Russia to invest, nobody does feasibility studies that include using of alternative source of power. It is most businesses that come into Nigeria that will always consider perhaps, okay, let's look at what we're going to spend for gas or for diesel in a year. So I didn't feel good that having spoken strongly to the issue of equity, the president had to go to the point where he started talking about loans. There are lots of things that we could re-examine in the country. There are lots of mineral resources that we have under the soil that if we could take our time to actually divest the economy away from crude oil, we get to the solid minerals, and we show up the quality of our services in the country. There are lots of areas in science and technology that we can actually be innovative about. We won't be having this kind of problems. So I need to say that the president perhaps would have done better rather than go talk about loans. We shouldn't go to such summit. We're not talking about other global platform. We're talking about BRICS, and we're talking about a contemporary as us in terms of South Africa also represented at that platform. So I think it is not appropriate, in my candid estimation, to go and be talking about loans where you should be talking about the opportunities available in your country that would attract people come there to put their money, create employment, and bolster your country's economy.
So let's talk about climate change. The president, like it's generally known, has said that Africa feels the impact of the climate change more, despite, contributing the least to global emissions. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I'll agree. Two angles to the questions you have raised. The first angle will be that because many foreign countries that have the funds are coming into different parts of Africa to set up their companies or to set up industries, the greenhouse emissions and the restrictions of it have not become as strong as it should be in this part of the world. And the emphasis has been to cut down everything that has to do with, uncontrolled emissions that affect the quality of air that we breathe. So when most of these countries that want to invest come into Africa, they come into Africa without understanding the available policy framework that guides such emissions, because we could talk about the Denmark Accord, we could talk about the Oslo Accord, we could talk about the several meetings that have been held, talking about the global concerns and the gatherings that we have had. And we can say authoritatively that Africa has not been uh, strongly positioned with regard to legislating and making a uniform policy on how to control such emissions into the atmosphere. So, in one area, Africa is affected by poor policy work that has affected the control. Now, on another note, many countries of the world are evolving away from technologies that will allow such emissions into the air. So you want to talk about, for instance, electric vehicles. Many countries of the world in Europe and the Americas, they're actually investing heavily in that. As a matter of fact, many of them are also investing heavily in vehicles that make use of gas, more or less like the hybrid one that we've adopted. Many economies in Africa are sincerely not ready to transition to that. And if we are railroaded as a continent or as a country into following suit, lots of jobs will be lost. Because for countries that are evolving from such carbon emissions into the sphere of cleaner energy, they have created alternative for their people to be assimilated with regards to jobs. Then many of these countries have also evolved the system where the people who are working in certain sectors are able to be trained and equipped enough to move into the new phase of technologies that they have adopted. This is what hasn't been done by our people. And I think that we have to really reason, quite frankly, as a country and by extension as a continent, about the choices we make so that our economy will not be totally dependent on import, so that we'll be able to move at our pace to stabilize what we have to stabilize to allow for a robust continent in terms of economy, in terms of finance, in terms of investment, and to also ensure that as the most populous black nation in the world, Nigeria doesn't fall behind.
Thank you, Adeniyi, for joining us and sharing your thoughts with us.